Welcome to the Morning Smiles podcast. In these episodes, we discuss with other business professionals about the world of making conscious decisions, especially in social settings like conferences and work events. Morning Smiles isn't just a podcast. It's a movement from the visionaries behind Sober Life Rocks.
Good morning. I'm Margy Schaller, co-founder of Sober Life Rocks. I want to welcome you today and let you know that you are not alone. How many of you have been in those situations where the alcohol-forward events at conferences or business parties have made you feel isolated? I know I have. But through this podcast, we're changing that narrative. We're here to create a community where individuals like you who choose not to drink or just drink less can find camaraderie, support, and practical advice. So let's get this conversation started. It is my privilege and ultimate honor to introduce you to Brandi Marzolino. She is a phenomenal woman. She's the founder of Courage and Joy at Work, where she works with group dental practices, dental business owners, and teams in finding not just profit in their business, but peace in the way that they do that. Brandi is also one of our founding members at Sober Life Rocks, and I'm just so excited to have her here to have this conversation. So welcome, Brandi.
Thank you so much, and I'm so honored and delighted to be here too.
Excellent. So, Brandi, I really don't actually know a whole lot about your backstory, and I would just love to know, to start with, in your family of origin, can you share at all kind of what your family's relationship was with alcohol and kind of where you started in that kind of world?
Yeah, for sure. So there is alcoholism on both sides of my family. So I was sort of brought up in that culture. And I didn't know it was that at the time, right? Just a lot of drinking and partying and excessive energy and chaos and all of those types of things. So I lost my mom when I was 14 years old from a string of events, but definitely rooted in a lifestyle that wasn't healthy. And my dad is still around. He struggles with his own, demons and mental illness and things like that too. But yeah, I often say I came from a long line of addiction. My dad's father, my grandfather passed away at a very young age as well due to addiction and alcoholism. And it wasn't so much said, this person passed away from alcoholism, right? It was usually the symptoms of what alcoholism brought on. So yeah, I was raised in that environment and it's very familiar to me. However, I didn't realize that it wasn't exactly normal or healthy until about 15-ish years ago.
Yeah. So I totally relate with what you're saying. I mean, when I did a family tree of all of the people in my family who have alcoholism, I mean, it's tough. And I grew up with that normalization of every day that you start to drink at, as soon as you walk in the door from work, and that you drink until you go to bed. Like that was normal.
Mm-hmm.
So when did you start to drink, and what did that look like?
Yeah, I did the usual stuff in, well, maybe not so usual. I did start drinking in high school. I feel like everyone probably did, but not everyone did. So I did the typical high school partying and things like that. And what's interesting is I didn't like the taste of alcohol. Many people say, that have dealt with addiction say, oh, the first time I had, alcohol touched my lips, it was, euphoria. I didn't have that experience. I always resisted partying. I kind of identified more as like the goody two shoes type. I tried to be cool and fit in and do what everybody else was doing. I used to drink Zimas. I don't think they make them anymore, but Zima, I used to put like a Jolly Rancher in it to try to sweeten it. I was always trying to like change the taste of it because I didn't really like it all that much. But I did engage in that kind of stuff. And then when I got into college, I was so uncomfortable in college. I just had, I was still dealing with all kinds of trauma and identity issues, which of course I didn't realize at the time. I just knew that didn't fit in and I felt horrible. But I started drinking more heavily, I would say probably towards the end of my freshman year of college. And at that point, I really started to experience the relief from how I was feeling on the inside.
Mm.
And it wasn't so much about the taste, it was more about just like the relief that I felt of extreme discomfort and feeling like I didn't belong, and that inner struggle that I was constantly having.
I can so relate to that. I mean, especially when I went off to college, like I don't, I always have struggled with social anxiety, but I thought that the way to maybe grow and do that differently was to join a sorority, because I'd always been like one of the
Yeah.
guys, but I'd always palled around with the guys in
Mm-hmm.
high school. So I thought, all right, I'm going to figure out how to have a relationship, like healthy relationship with women. So I joined a sorority, and oh, Brandi, I was so uncomfortable. I mean, all these girls were talking about all these girly things, and they would take forever to put on their makeup and get like, what are you guys doing? You pull on your clothes,
Mm-hmm.
you do a little quick thing, and you're off. No.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I really, really relate to that feeling of just wicked uncomfortable. And in fact, we in the sorority, they would have like pre-parties, right? Where you would start
Mm-hmm.
as you were getting ready. And I was like, all right, well, you guys do you. I'm going to sit over here and pre-party. But
Yeah.
that was, yeah, I get it. So
Mm-hmm.
now you go from college into your professional life. And so what does that
Mm-hmm.
look like?
Yeah, well, college was, I mean, and I definitely identify and relate to a lot of what you're sharing about your college experience. There was always the party, and then the after party, right?
Mhm.
It just kept going and going, and that went on for a bit. But there was something often inside of me that was like, this doesn't feel good. This feels like I don't resonate with this. I always knew something was off, but again, anyone I never knew anything about addiction or alcohol use disorder or anything like that. Like it was never a discussion. So I've always had very, very strong intuition, which is often why I feel the need to numb out, right? Because I'm feeling everything. I'm a big feeler and I'm a highly sensitive person. And so I did quit drinking in for senior year of college. There was also I ended up getting put on academic probation for a period of time. I mean, I went from being like a star to just not, and then I was like, okay, I need to do something here. So I did that. I got myself in order a bit, and then I went on to graduate school, and that was where my drinking then progressed more because I went west.
Mm.
And I was very much into the outdoors, and my degrees originally are in geology of all things. So that's even part of the culture, is camping, drinking, going deep into the wilderness, philosophizing about many things, and you'd pass a bottle of whiskey or something around the fire, with everybody. I don't know if people
Gosh,
really
I
do
had
that these
no,
days, but we did that.
I had no idea that that's what geology expeditions look
Yeah.
like. Oh,
Yeah, you can find some really, really good drinkers in the world of geology. And so, yeah, I worked as a geologist, I worked as a scientist for a period of time, and that was just built into the culture. Um, and then I always knew, though, again, something didn't feel right because when I wasn't drinking, I was one person. When I did drink, I was another person. And I wasn't a bad person. It was just like I just I loved feeling I'm a very routine person. I really like order. I really like how things come together. I mean, that's what makes me really good at what I do now in the world of operations, strategy, development, all of those things. I have a very strategic, operational based mind, right? And so there's a lot of this to it, and there's like a healthy cadence. And so that's just who I am. And then I also have this high sensitivity, never feeling like I was accepted for who I wanted to be. And again, that comes from my family of origin as well. Always felt like the outcast. My parents didn't accept me for who I was, and there wasn't anything really unique or special about me. It was all based on performance, being a good student, achievement, all of that. And, I think also the sign of the times then was you didn't cry, the saying, I don't want to see you cry or I'll give you something to cry about, those types of sayings all the time that were just very much like I lost trust with myself and who I was. I didn't know that how I felt mattered.
Yeah.
Became very much based on like external, right?
Yep.
So there was a lot of that going on. And I vacillated quite a bit between trying to get my act together and being perfect to being, oh, this is so overwhelming. I need to release. So then I'd have these episodes of drinking. And I did carry that into my young professional life. And I did quit for the first time. I think I was around 28. I was around 28 years old. The first time I really worked on getting sober. And that happened because I was, again, it was such a existential crisis, impending doom of like, I knew something was off and I couldn't put my finger on it. And I went and got a therapist. And I often joke about this. I think she must have just graduated. I don't know. I just found her online through my insurance carrier at the time. And I was like, oh, she has an office close by and she accepts my insurance. And hindsight, 2020, she was very young. But I went to her and I said, I think I don't like who I am when I drink. That was all I could really say. And I do these things when I drink that they don't really line up with who I am when I'm sober or not drinking, right? And I was the one that came to her and said, have you ever heard of AA? And she was like, yeah, I don't really know much about it. And that's why I thought, looking
No.
back, I'm thinking she's new or something.
Oh
I know.
no.
So I was like, she's like, I'm going to see if I can find a pamphlet. And I just had this total misperception of what it was. And I didn't have any idea. I just knew something was wrong. And it took until I got to, I met somebody at a party and they were not drinking. And long story short, we ended up having a couple conversations and I asked them, I said, hey, do you want to grab a drink sometime? And they were young and hip and really cool. And they said, no, actually, I don't drink. And I was like, really? And they're like, yeah, I haven't had a drink in almost 2 years. And I was like, what? And I said, how do you do that? And they said, actually, I'm in AA. And they said it with this like waiting for me to be like, oh, well, I can't deal with that, But I was like, what? Show me your ways, So it was almost as if this person was put in front of me. And it was right around this time where I was trying to figure all this out. And here was this young, vibrant person who just seemed really cool. And they were sort of my gateway to
I mean,
recovery.
I love that so much because I feel like so much of this is the law of attraction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
when in the past people heard about AA, it was always the, down and out old person,
Mm-hmm.
homeless, like lost everything or mean drunk or whatever. But I have had the similar experience. I met somebody who was she was full of like energy and laughter and always the one that everybody was like gathered around. And she was 5 years sober when I met her. And I was like, what? Is that true? So I
Yeah.
get it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like that's one of the things that I want for us to be able to, this mission of normalizing sober choices, like it, you have no idea how many people that you talk to in your daily life who are either sober in recovery or sober by choice or hardly drink at all. And they still have so much fun all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what a great
Yeah.
attraction.
Yeah. Yeah. It was awesome. And I was checking out the shop, the Sober Life Rocks merch shop that
Uh-huh.
we have now. And I liked the one t-shirt was like sober and still the life of the party or something like that. I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome. Because it is
Absolutely.
even funny because even my husband and I now, when we go out, it's always like, he's like, oh, people are always around you and stuff like that. And it's just, it doesn't go away. And so many people that I've met in recovery too, oh my gosh, they're so funny. And I've said to a handful of people, I was like, man, we could have a comedy show based on some of the people that are, in this group, because people find their humor. It's just, they're hysterical. They're so fun. They find it, they discover, they have this like artistry talent. My husband discovered he's an amazing artist. He's also sober. And so, yeah, he just creates this beautiful artwork that he had no idea that even existed inside of him. But yeah, there's so many cool things that come out once you stop numbing yourself, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. All right. So I want to take you back. So you said that
Yeah.
was the first time you got sober, but
Yeah.
obviously when you say first time, that means that you went out and did some more drinking. But so fast forward me then to the
Mm-hmm.
place right before you got sober for real. What was happening in your
Yeah.
life?
Yeah, I was at a crossroads. I was in a really challenging part of my life and my career. And because again, the first time I was experimenting with this, I was relatively young. All things considered, I didn't have what some people call like their big bottom. I just knew something was off. I didn't quite feel right in my skin. I did stay in recovery, and I was sober for just over 4 years. And I wasn't convinced, I suppose. And as some of my mentors say, that I needed to go out and do some more research. But yeah, there's a variety of reasons, and that's probably a podcast for another day. But I did. I went and I drank. I started drinking again for about 5 more years, and my life did not get better. It got way more chaotic. But it was also, our addictions can shift a bit, right? So for me, workaholism is right up there with it, perfectionism and all of that. And so I really started, when those are amped up, like they all go up, right? So I was drinking a lot, but I was working a lot. So externally, I just looked like I had it all together. I was experiencing a lot of success in my career, and I was managing all of that, right? And it was the amount of money, I look back to the amount of money I spent on just trying to manage my emotional state,
Yeah.
right? Where quitting drinking would have solved 99% of them, right? But I was always in this roller coaster of emotion that I was trying to manage through all kinds of like naturopathic, homeopathic. I mean, I was spending so much money on self-help retreats, acupuncture, like yoga retreats,
Yep.
smoothies, juices, everything under the sun when it came to like healing. I
Yep.
was doing that because I'm like, I just don't feel right. And I did have a doctor say to me once, you ever think about not drinking anymore? I was like, yeah,
Right.
I did that, but that's not the problem. So, but yeah, I was just at this heightened place of my life was just kind of snowballing, with transitions in work, transitions in relationships, moving locations, and things like that. So, that was sort of where I was at the height of it all.
Okay. And so what happened?
Yeah, so I just, I had come to a point where life had just gotten really, I would say, too extreme. And I had met my partner at the time, now my husband at the time, who was sober, which was pretty cool. And I had shared, at the time too, I was also very much immersed in the programs of Al-Anon and ACA because of my background. So when I had first
ECA, by the
stopped
way, is
drinking,
adult children of
yep,
alcoholics. Yep.
yes, yep, you got it. And so I had, when I quit the first time, I started going to AA, Al-Anon, and ACA. And then when I decided to drink again, I maintained Al-Anon and ACA because I also thought everyone else was the problem. And if I could just create enough boundaries, they wouldn't stress me out enough. And they wouldn't stress me out so much I felt the need to drink. So I kind of was blaming the stress of the external world on why I drank. And
Yeah.
so I was trying to figure out what's the magic formula to get everyone else to just do what I need them to do
Yeah.
so they didn't impact me so much because they're the ones causing me to drink, right?
Yeah.
So that was where my belief system had shifted. And yeah, I mean, I had gotten to a point when I got here, I got together with my now husband who was sober. And I had been drinking, and it was very quickly with him because he was fine with the idea that I drank if he thought I drank, normally. And he very quickly realized that wasn't the case. And we had a lot of arguments and frustration, and one thing led to another. And then I realized that because once you go down the road of recovery, it never leaves you. And so I was just in so much denial and frustration about having quit. I was too proud to admit, like, oh, maybe I actually do need some help. Because I tried it once before and I quit. And so I wanted to be really firm in my decision. Like, I quit because I knew better. And it was really hard for me to say, actually, maybe all those people that said, maybe you shouldn't quit AA were right. That was really hard. So yeah, I ended up coming back in.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing all that. So I want to shift the conversation now, Brandi, to what it was like and what it continues to be like as a sober woman in your business roles. Because, working is one thing, but then it's all the other stuff. It's the interacting with people after hours. It's the phrase whining and dining, or it's how do you interact with people who you used to drink with and now you have made this decision, and what is that like? Like, talk to me about some of those encounters.
Yeah, I would say when I first started my career in dental, when I made that switch, it was about yeah, gosh, it was a long time ago. I think almost 15ish years ago. So I was sober, and then I started my career in dental shortly after I had started drinking again. It was all around the same time. And I was living in New York City at the time as well. And so there's a bar every 2 feet basically. And I didn't know the world of dental or the world of networking or the world of, going to giant events without alcohol. In the past, of course I've done events and I've gone to big things and stuff like that, but I was always like you were saying, I had this social anxiety, which again, I didn't know that's what it was. Right. And I also didn't know that it was because I had no trust in myself. I didn't know who I was. I didn't have any rootedness or groundedness. I didn't have any of that. I was sort of this anxious ball of energy going around worrying about what everyone thought of me and trying to be perfect and to get it right. And so for a long time, yeah, so for my whole early part of my career, it was going to these mega events, networking, meeting people, traveling all over, and often having alcohol as what most say is a social lubricant, or one way to like ease myself in the process. And so that's what I was used to. So then when I finally got sober again, and now I'm going on 7 years, and
Woo, woo.
I avoided, yeah, thank you. I avoided events. It was terrifying for me to go back to those familiar places, but they weren't so familiar. They didn't feel safe, because also when I did these events in the past, there was always so much drama associated with them, like the after hour craziness that happens. It always felt unbelievably exhausting, like coming back from these events after drinking and stuff like that. I remember being on flights on the way home, and I would just be like silently almost like crying, just this release of, oh my God, I'm so glad that's over. It was so much. And I just felt so like emotionally, physically, spiritually drained. And yeah, it really just kind of wiped me out. And so I didn't have a relationship with these events really as a sober person. And I didn't know how to do it. And I didn't know
Just flat
how
out didn't
to,
go.
yeah, I didn't go. I avoided them because the thought of going made, literally, I had a visceral reaction of just like, oh, I can't, And the idea of, I didn't know how to do it. And my association were all these sort of negative experiences that I had.
Mhm.
And so the idea just kind of terrified me. And it just felt gross, to be honest, like just kind of this icky feeling. Like I just didn't want to go. And as a woman in these spaces, it's also challenging, right? Because it's a lot of this, puffiness and stuff like that. And there's this idea that you have to present a certain way and look a certain way and be a certain way and, laugh at the jokes and like, you know, and so meanwhile too, not only has time passed with my recovery, but I'm also getting older and wiser and more mature. And now I'm in my mid 40s, and compared to, late 20s, early 30s, like as a woman now, I, have pretty strong position on how I feel about those things
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
compared to being younger. And like, no, we're not doing that, or I don't need to, like, you don't need to put your hand around my back, or like we don't need to have that, right? Where in the past those things would happen and you're just kind of like, oh, from I don't want to upset this person because they might be a good contact, or you're stuck in this like you're losing yourself and in the process, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brandi, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I think that one of the things that for me has been so challenging over all of these years, where I never told anybody else that I was sober, was uh, I felt like I needed to still behave in the same way as I behaved when I was drinking in order to be with the
Mm-hmm.
cool kids, which doesn't
Yeah.
mean the really bad behavior. It just means that, like you said, sort of the putting on the mask and,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
acting as if this whole thing is hilarious and fun, when that's not authentically how I was experiencing it. And
Yeah.
I didn't have anybody else that I knew who I could like hang out with and have an authentically good time with, because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel safe to say that I was sober.
Yeah. 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 I totally relate. And um so this last year was when I first started going to events again.
Mm,
And I had some anxious feelings probably. So I signed up for this one event, and I probably had anxious feelings like 2 months leading up to the, I mean, the minute I signed up for it, probably up until when I went, I was unbelievably anxious. And I was so consumed with, how I was going to be and what I was going to wear and what the environment was going to be like. It was almost like I was going into the lion's den or something. I just had no idea. And I hadn't done it in so long. And when I first got there, what do we have? A cocktail party,
yep.
right? And I don't even know. It felt like 1,000 people. I don't know if there were that many, but there were a lot. And it was this like rooftop cocktail party, which is pretty standard, where everyone goes and they start drinking and everyone's getting lubed up, and networking. And they didn't have any like water stations or anything like that. There wasn't even, I'm fine with just drinking water. I don't need any sort of special mocktail or anything like that, although they're fun. But I had brought my water bottle, my Nalgene water bottle, to this cocktail party. I set it down, it disappeared. No one stole it. I don't know where it went, but I was sweating. I felt so uncomfortable. And I just didn't know how to be, right?
Mm.
And then the night kept going on where it was just more eating and drinking, eating and drinking. And I was like, I started looking up flights to go home probably 4 hours after I got there. And I was supposed to be there for like 3 days, right?
Wow.
Because I just thought, I need to get out of here. I can't I hate this. This is
Yeah.
the worst. And I had all these negative feelings and thoughts of I don't belong here. No one wants to talk to me. I was so sensitive. People would look at me and then look over me. I didn't have any importance or relevance. Like they were looking for somebody cooler, better, whatever. And I just thought, what am I doing? I don't belong here. And then this is the gift of recovery and all of the work I've been doing. Even for the years I went back out, I was still always working on myself. But for the 20 plus years I've been working on myself, I just started taking it a moment at a time, doing the next right thing, the next best thing. And I have this philosophy of just keep showing up and just honoring myself in that moment. So I just kept showing up. And there was this activity they had in the evening, and I really didn't want to go. And I said, okay, you've come all this way. I think you were even saying something about this too, the amount of money we pay to do these events, right? So I was like, you've come all this way, go to the event. And so I went to the event and I went by myself. And by that point, everyone had already passed the tipping point of having drank too much.
Mm.
Like you could just tell the energy was
Yes.
sloppy and weird. And so I went into the event, and it was like a bunch of art and stuff like that. And I found one of the artists there that had some of their work on display. And we just started talking, and we had this amazing conversation about her art and spirituality and this, place I'd gone to back east that, does, they call it art church. And we just had a really great conversation, and it was really beautiful. And I kind of scanned the room, and I just got the feeling, I said, okay, I think we're good here. And I was in bed by 8:30 that night.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just practiced self-care. And I was like, okay, what time would I go to bed normally? Probably around, between 8:30 and 10 most nights. So I'll do that. I don't need to, it's the whole, because my whole life, and one of the reasons I drank was I was always abandoning myself. And now
Yes.
I'm learning I no longer need to abandon myself. And so I chose not to abandon myself in those moments. And I showed up and I honored my self-care. And, and then by the end of the event, it was a beautiful experience. I'd gotten through the hump of it.
Yeah.
And that is where we met, our friend Greg, and that was that event. So
Yeah. Well, so tell me about what it's been like now that you know other people who don't drink as you're
yeah,
navigating these business events.
it's unbelievable. I mean, this was literally what I was dreaming of. Because at that event that I'm speaking of, by the end of it, because I stayed through the whole thing, by the end of it, I ran into a colleague who I knew was sober. Um, but we had just met each other, prior. And we set aside some time, and we went and we were chatting. We were talking about a business related thing. And he looked at me and he said, how are you? Because I think he could just tell on my face that I was just completely spent. And I said, not great. This is really hard. This is really, really hard. And I said, this was right before Sober Life Rocks was created. I said, do you know if there's a group of people that are sober, like in this industry, that come together? And he said, no, but there really needs to be. And I was like, yeah, like, where are everybody? Like, where is everybody? And because he took me right under his wing and he's like, come on, I'll help you out. And he took me back upstairs to the vendors and was introducing me to people. And I just felt this, because when you're working on, whether you're sober or not, or you're just not engaged in that sort of mainstream,
Mhm.
drinking energy, it is a different experience. It's a different vibe. It feels safe, more safe. And so when I had that experience with him, it was just like I felt part of something. I felt connected. And then what was wild was the Dental Entrepreneurial Women's Summit was the next event I had gone to. And what's even crazier is I actually wasn't in the room when Laura did her talk, because I had to go back upstairs and I had to do a client call. And so I come back down and I asked the woman at the table, I said, what did I miss? And she goes, oh my God, it was so amazing. And she was telling me everything. And she said, and this woman, she got up and she said she doesn't drink. And, she, and all these people raised their hand that said that they were either sober or sober curious. And I was like, what? Like, how did I miss this? These were the people I was looking for. And so I was just I gotta find her, and this was Laura at the time. And so and then she was, you guys were famous at this point after her talk, and so she was constantly surrounded by people the rest of the event. And so I found her later on Facebook. And I was like, can't believe I missed your talk. This is amazing. And then her and I were able to connect. But just knowing
Yes.
that you're out there, oh my gosh, it has brought like endless, I'm an advocate for peace, and it's just brought like endless peace to me and community. And yeah, my whole life, I've always felt like I didn't belong. And I've always felt like somehow I'm a little bit of a misfit, and I constantly have to like navigate myself to fit into what everybody else wants of me. And as I've gotten older, I do less of it, but there's still part of it, right? Because we do need each other. But then to find your community where you're like, oh, okay, I don't need to even say anything. Like, you get it.
Yeah.
It just alleviates so much of that pain, but then also it allows us to talk about things that really matter. Like, I don't have to play that game, and we can focus on like cool stuff and like making a difference and like what we're really all out to accomplish, not how
Yes.
we're navigating our hangover this morning.
Yes.
you know
And that's exactly what I'm experiencing too. I mean, I'm a member of Sober Life Rocks as well.
Yeah.
And for me, it feels really healthy that it's not about recovery, right? There are
Yeah.
other places that you go for recovery, that this is for community, and this is for
Hmm.
uplifting each other, and this is for feeling as though we matter,
Yeah.
who we authentically are. And that's why I was saying earlier, like showing up at these events where I felt like I had to morph myself into something else, and then it just felt icky, but there really wasn't anything else that I knew to do. Honestly, one of the things that I've been the most surprised about, Brandi, is how many people are having conversations with me who aren't sober, but drink
Yeah.
very, very light moderation. And they don't like the mainstream heavy drinking culture either. And they're just excited to know that there are other people who they can show up authentically as, and have
Hmm.
networking that is meaningful and memorable, and that we, the dollars and the effort we spend going actually end up feeling like, oh my God, I just had the most amazing conversation with somebody like you described with that artist, but with each other in these business
Yeah.
settings. Like, I'm so excited. I have not felt this um, both energy and relief for a long
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
what
you're right.
was
Because oh,
good?
I was just gonna say, even though people aren't sober, they just, drink, whatever feels good for them. The idea is so many of the events, which I know we're all working on, is built around drinking, right? And so it's sort of the default of like, oh, what do we do with all these people for networking and connection if we're not in the meeting setting? It's like, oh, let's have it at a bar. Let's have it be around like a tequila tasting or a whiskey there's always like something that involves drinking, and then that becomes the focus, and it's usually this amplified energy. And most people, they really, are grateful for the time where it's just a little bit quieter, maybe just even you can just connect at a deeper level, because that truly is like connecting versus connecting around the drink or the party
Yes.
or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yes.
So I can see that. Yeah.
So one last question for people who are listening who maybe aren't drinking for whatever reason, but haven't shared that in as public a platform as this, or
Yeah.
with their colleagues. Like, what would you say has been the reaction you've gotten from people when you now say, I don't drink?
It's mixed, to be honest. Sometimes you'll find somebody who knows somebody, right? And there's this like, oh yeah, okay. There's other times where people feel this sense of, tell me more about that, because it's something they want to explore for themselves. I'm finding that more and more, where it's, you know, yeah, I feel like for somebody to say I'm an alcoholic, it takes a certain, experiences to kind of bring you to that. Most people are saying, yeah, I probably drink too much,
Mhm.
is a little more common, and they want to explore how to not drink as much. So it sort of opens them up. I'm a very open and honest person. So most people tend to be a little bit more vulnerable with me. So it does open up more vulnerability though, like really honest, truthful dialogue. And they also get that by me sharing my own experiences, they feel less judged,
Mhm.
because it's like, hey, I often say too, either I've done it myself or I know several people that have. So it takes a lot, as I'm sure for you too, to surprise us nowadays when we hear certain things, but it puts their guard down a little bit and they become more curious and they feel safe to explore it. And there is the occasional person that's like, do you have a problem? Like, like something might be wrong with you. But often I know that it sometimes is a reflection of their own self judgment, like I remember eons ago when I explored being, vegetarian and vegan, everybody that ate meat or animal products were very, very defensive towards me because it was a mirror to them that they were consuming animal products. I didn't care that they did, right? This was just my own choice, my preference. I was experimenting. I was in my 20s, And so usually that sort of judgment is because they're confronted by it a little bit. Um that still happens, but it's not the norm. It's a little bit more the exception. But I would say most people are more curious about it.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, Brandi, I just cannot thank you enough for being so vulnerable and sharing your story with everybody. It's the power of hearing somebody else's story and hearing the success on the other end is part of what helped me eventually get sober. Sounds like in many cases it
Mm-hmm.
was for you and for other people.
Yeah.
So thank you for the gift of sharing all that today. Was there anything at all that you wanted to share as a closing thought or?
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I'm just so grateful for you and Laura for starting this initiative. And I mean, it is transformative and revolutionary and has brought just what's being created is just super profound, and I'm really excited about what's happening. And I just encourage everybody who's remotely interested to become a member or just to join along, because sort of what you were alluding to also, it's not just, you don't have to identify in any certain way, but even if you're an advocate for transforming the experience of events to have it be more nourishing. And we are in healthcare, and whatever, wherever this continues to grow, it'll have some sort of probably umbrella of healthcare, not just dentistry and things like that. But I really feel that if we're in the business of helping others, whether it's through coaching, consulting, being a provider, medical provider in the medical profession, like being able to sort of work and heal on ourselves too and be those beacons of hope for other people is so critical. And that's why I love doing what I'm doing too, because the ripple effect of that, if you have a healthy doctor, a healthy hygienist, a healthy team, the impact on that, you bring it to your families, to your patients, is pretty profound. So if you want to be part of that and lifting the vibration of everybody through this work, I think that's what you and Lauren were all out to achieve. So sign up.
Awesome. I love that. Thank you so much. Hey,
You're
Brandi,
welcome.
what's your favorite
Yes.
candy?
Oh my gosh. First thing that comes to mind is Jolly Rancher, but I don't know if it's my favorite. But I ate a lot of them when I first quit drinking. Were those freaking Jolly Ranchers?
Oh my gosh.
Probably
And
not good for your teeth though.
if you could step into a transporter and instantly be somewhere for a 3-day vacation, where would that be?
I've always wanted to go to South Africa to see the lions and the elephants. So I'm really into big cats. I've always wanted to go see this rescue place in South Africa where they rescue lions and stuff. So that's on my bucket list, but it's pretty far out bucket list item, yeah.
I love it. And so there you are, you're having this experience and you get to have lunch with one person who you want to say thank you to in your life. Who is that?
Oof, that I want to say thank you to. I've always had on my very short list a fellow by the name of John Muir, who he's from the early 1900s, but he was a big environmentalist. He was sort of the man who helped create our national parks He was a big advocate. He hiked in the Sierra Nevada, big outdoors person, big environmentalist, activist for the great outdoors. And I just remember reading a lot of his work when I was in college, and it was really profound to me. And it kind of started me on my path to finding a lot of peace and spirituality through nature. So, John
Is a
Muir.
great answer. And he would love being out there with the big cats and the elephants. Brandi,
Yeah.
thank you so much. And for all of you listening, remember that you never regret not drinking the next morning, which is why we call it the Morning Smiles podcast. And we look forward to having the conversation with you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us on Morning Smiles podcast. Remember, every decision you make today shapes the smiles of your tomorrows. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and follow us on social. No one needs to do this alone. Here's to making choices that brighten your world and your morning smiles.
For stories and discussions that celebrate conscious living and, most importantly, keeping you smiling.